Hi, everybody. Welcome to my play on a horrible, horrible saying. So I'm Kenneth Love. There's a good chance some of you know me from Treehouse, where I taught Python and Django for a long time. I left that about 2 weeks ago. Now I work for the people who make books with animals on them. So if you like animal books, buy animal books. They're great. In my past, I've done a lot of speaking at conferences like this one. I've taught in my own video series online that didn't go so great. I did corporate training. I've done technical review on books. I've helped mentor people, all this kind of stuff. And I bring all that up because I find it to be all related to teaching. It's all under the teaching umbrella, and I guarantee you every single one of you is a teacher as well. You've taught someone at work. You've taught a family member how to check their email or send a picture to you. You've done something. So I'm going to talk about ways to reach a better audience and to help them remember things better. Maybe not better audience, bigger audience. But before I do that, I have a warning, which is I'm self-taught at teaching. I figured if I could teach myself how to be a programmer, I could teach myself how to be a teacher. I guess it worked. That said, though, there's not really any pedagogy in this, and I'm not an expert at teaching. Find your nearest teacher and ask them questions about how to actually teach. Also, as a straight white male, I get, and cis, yes, thank you, I get a lot of privilege. So a large part of my talk is about helping people that don't have those privileges. So reaching a more diverse and inclusive audience. There's a lot of social justice-y things, so if you don't like that, door's over there. All right, so the first half of my talk, I say first half, the first section is about reaching a wider audience because you want to get more people to listen to you and to pay attention when you listen. You don't want them to tune you out because you've, annoyed them or you've forgotten them or whatever. These all apply whether you're a coach, a mentor, or a teacher. So let's talk about reassurances. So you want to tell your students that they're doing a good job, right? You want people to feel that they're making progress. But beyond that, you also want them to know that what they're doing is a hard thing. It's not easy to learn, especially things like programming or, well, really anything. But programming is a hard thing to learn. I recently read a blog post about learning requiring deep work. So as developers, we've all had that zone you get into where you're in the problem, you're in that, in that area where you're doing all of your best work, right? Everything else is faded away and you're just focusing on programming. And then somebody comes by with a meeting request and it's destroyed. Learning requires that exact same mentality. You have to get into that mindset where all you're doing is learning. You're concentrating on picking up these new ideas, these new concepts, and applying them to something in your life. So make sure people understand that when they're learning, they have to have that time and that space to get into learning. It's good to repeat modules. Let people go over things multiple times. Not everybody learns the same things, the same speed. How many of you know how to write a decorator just off the top of your head? Few of you? Okay. I've written a lot of decorators. I still look at the docs for how to write decorators. And none of us are, of course, born knowing how to do really anything. We've learned everything. Students will often put teachers on a pedestal, so it really helps to remind them that you're a student too, the things you've had a hard time learning. And I feel you should also encourage breaks. I guess this is a little bit of me getting into how to teach. But if you've done an all-night study marathon, how much of it did you remember 2 weeks later? It's usually not as much as you remember for the test the next day, right? So taking a break while you're learning is really good. Having a bit of food or water or a walk is really good. Blood helps you do a lot of things, so keep that moving. And also, just like with problem solving, a change of scenery often helps for learning something too. You read a chapter in a book, go take a walk around the block. While you're thinking about that chapter, let it sink in and give you new light. Okay, so I'm going to get to the inclusion part here. If you can, and you definitely can, use ambiguous and non-gendered names. It's really not that hard to use a name that isn't Bob. It's also not that hard to use a pronoun like they or we, or even the ones that are weirder if you want to expand your audience even further. Use names that aren't American names, like typical American names. So it's kind of silly. Go online and pull up like a baby name dictionary and pick random names out of that. Someone should make a Python module for that. It would be great. Don't expect for other things like idioms or customs to be universal. They're really not. A coworker of mine, when I was teaching at Treehouse, he had students writing Java by hand in a text editor, so no tab completion. And when he finally got them to the point of using IDEs, he told them as punishment they could dunk him in a dunk tank. He had many students write to him that didn't know what a dunk tank was, because it's like an American carnival thing. It's not as widespread as you might think. And then something that I always have to remember is to slow down. Native speakers tend to speak really fast, and we use a lot of contractions and shortened phrases, and that can be very difficult for people who are speaking English as a second or third or whatever language. Someone mentioned it earlier, or maybe it was yesterday, the things programmers believe about names, things programmers believe about dates, all these things that we assume are standards. Those are good to go look through and find places where you can improve how you use things. So as part of the pronoun thing, I always like to bring up this email I got from a student. I usually can't read it out loud because it gets me a little choked up, but I'll let you all read it. The example I gave was a really stupid one. I was taking the Lumberjack song from Monty Python and putting it in my own name and my own pronoun. But I used other names and other pronouns, and that made this person feel recognized, and that's really important. So help your students feel like you see them, even if you can't physically see them. So on the topic of pronouns, I'd like to bring up that guys is gendered. A friend of mine, Lacey, who is from Texas, once encouraged all of us to embrace the y'all, and I will bring that back. Y'all is a wonderful word. I put yous in here just for y'all in New York. Friends and enemies is one of my favorite greetings, so and it lets everyone wonder which side they're on. So there's plenty of ways to greet a crowd of people. Or just individuals. Call everyone y'all. It's great. And then let's talk about relatives. So easy my mom can do it, or so easy my grandma can do it, are absolutely horrible phrases. Sure, there are lots of parents that are not technically with it, but so what? It's no reason to call them out for it, and it's definitely no reason to throw gender into it as well. Moms get a lot of shit done, so leave them alone. And I like to bring up, on the flip side of this too, like there's a common conception of the boy in the family being technically very savvy, right? They're the ones that play video games all the time. They can program the DVR or whatever. But that's not always the case. For families where there may not be a lot of money, or for families where maybe they've had traditional agrarian jobs in the past, they're not the ones that are technically savvy. They're as new to this as anyone else. So putting those expectations on them can be very harmful. Avoid four-letter words, but not the ones you're thinking of. I don't care about profanity. Say any of those things you want. Don't say easy. Don't say just. Don't say only. Don't say simple. Don't say everyone can do this. You all already know. Those things, because they're not all. Easy is relative. Easy is one of the most relative words in the world. So, and then one I found several times at this conference and every other conference is tech shaming. We say explicit is better than implicit, and then we gripe about public static void. It's very explicit. So don't make people feel bad because they started with PHP or JavaScript, or they run Windows, or whatever. They don't use Vim. Who cares? There's nothing that works for everyone, and I have seen so many people who get really, really upset at tech books or videos where they're like, well, we do this in Python, and that's great because we're better than PHP. We have stupid things. We all do. Everything does. I realize there's a lot of don'ts in this. It'll get less don'ty in a minute, I promise. But don'ty is good. I like knowing the things I'm doing wrong. Jargon is great, except when you're teaching somebody. It's really good if you're speaking to someone who's on your level. You can communicate vast ideas very quickly by talking about such and such pattern or this paradigm. When someone's new, though, it just leads to more confusion. It gives them 15 more things to go and Google that they wouldn't have had if you had just said, oh, well, I'm using this to watch the value over there. And we call this the observer pattern, by the way. Same with acronyms. I can't help Java developers on this one because there's a lot of acronyms there, but break them down as much as you can. And TLA is my favorite acronym, which stands for a 3-letter acronym. And then, do you remember the thing I said about pedestals? So if you can make mistakes in your teaching, it's a really great thing to help bring you back down to your students. It shows them that you're not perfect, you're going to make lots of mistakes, you're going to make typos, you're going to forget to create that object. I mean, David Beasley this morning, how many times did he forget to make his QE instance, right? And it was great, it was wonderful. And another great thing about making those mistakes is when you get that stack trace, now you can show your students how to read that stack trace. And stack traces in Python are not the easiest thing to read. It also gives you a really great chance to talk about refactoring, to talk about how you would improve something, how you do error handling. How would you prevent someone from making this mistake the next time? Or if you leave something open to where user error can cause a problem, you can cause that user error, and then you can show the students how to handle that as well. So having and allowing mistakes in your code and in your teaching gives people a lot of places where you can teach them new things. And let's talk about a mistake that I made. So earlier I mentioned taking a break and getting a snack, right? Which makes total sense. It's a thing that we do. You want to go have an apple or some chips, and then, hey, you feel good, you're back ready to work. I actually had a student once write to me and claim that I was encouraging American-style overeating by telling people to go get snacks. I don't know if I am or not, but I will recognize that there are people who don't have access to on-demand food, and that could be considered a maybe you shouldn't be doing this thing. So I don't know if it was a mistake or not. I can't say. I'm definitely not trying to encourage American-style overeating, so I hope I didn't, but it's good to know that I've made mistakes there. And I spelled it right that time. Okay, so now let's get on to some of the do's. So we went through don'ts, we'll go to some do's. So here's ways to help people remember things, hopefully better, cleaner, clearer. So if you're teaching programming, then coding challenges are a great thing to have. You can give people a bit of code or a blank slate, and you give them a problem that they have to write code for, or they have to fix your code or finish your code. These are really good. They're amazing. They're great for making sure people can apply the things they've learned. So it's kind of what like whiteboard challenges at job interviews should be, but they never are. And the good thing about this too is often they can really help you step up your unit test game, because we all need more help in unit testing, right? Something to bring up about these though, students often get really frustrated when they have to pry information out of the instructions. You want to be as explicit as you can be without giving away the answer. That's difficult. It's also difficult because you're often dealing with multiple languages, as in spoken and reading. So if you can get people that have other language backgrounds, and even programming backgrounds on that one too, that can really help to make sure that your prompts are as clear as possible for other people. And then for the last two on here, approaching them from different angles and repeating them. If you're going to teach somebody like how to write a function that takes an argument and then does something with that argument, fairly basic like beginner Python thing, right? Or programming period. Have them do that a time or two. You know, maybe the first time you write half of it, the next time they write all of it, and then have them do that as a single step in a later, larger code challenge. And that way they can start to internalize that these are things they're going to do every day, all the time, as just part of their natural job. And code challenges can be very frustrating for beginners, so try to be as accepting as you can of the answers. Test what comes out of the code they wrote, not the code that they wrote. It doesn't really matter what variable name they used, right? So long as the function does the thing you want it to do. I used to say this one was practice, not perfection, and then I realized I had stolen that, so I won't steal that. If you can give them a repository of code, especially a repository full of broken code, and say unit tests to go along with it, that can be another great way, especially for larger concepts or longer courses. And it's also good if you're doing, say, a live coding session online or in a tutorial. They can already have the code and be working through it with you without having to set up everything the whole time. I've also used this when doing live coding online to have people send me pull requests as they fix the things I set up as being wrong, which is a really cool way to help teach people Git or GitHub. And then story problems. I'm sure many of you remember doing really silly math problems in like middle school where one person has like 40 watermelons, another person has 10, and they swap 15 of them, so who has how many now? Those are horrible, but if you can turn story problems into more real life things, similar to user stories that you would have when building a feature, that can be really good for students, and it also gets them ready to do that kind of work when they get a job, or maybe in the job they already have. This one is going to be a little harder for everybody to source as a teacher, but if you can have animation or graphics of some sort to help illustrate your points, that can be really good. It helps to break down staring at a single person teaching the whole time, and it also helps you bring analogies into something a bit more physical for them to follow. If you're talking about a factory pattern, give them an animated factory that's building something. It feels silly the first time you do it, but it really does help a lot of people. It makes things a lot better. If you don't have people that can do animation for you and you can't do the animation yourself, there are a lot of places online where you can buy pre-rendered video, stock footage, things like that, which is great. And also, yeah, they're cartoons, but if we go back to the inclusion thing, you can have varied genders and ethnic backgrounds to help people recognize themselves, even in your examples. Oh, and the dunk tank thing, we actually rented a dunk tank and dunked Craig. So they all knew what a dunk tank was after that. I also got dunked. I'm not showing you that video. It was very cold in Portland in May. Notes and documentation. Give them things they can take home. Give them things that they can keep later that still have context. Jupyter notebooks are amazing for this because you can write out markdown cells that have all the instructions and the teaching parts, and then you can have code cells where they can change the code, they can run the code you wrote, and they can see what's going on. And give them project files if you can't do the rest of that, so they can at least remember what they were doing and see what was in there. And that's actually my last slide. And I got like 7 minutes, so that's a couple of questions. But if you want to talk to me, I'll be here for the rest of the day. I'm Kenneth Love on Treehouse. If you want to teach, there are a million places out there to teach. Meetups and boot camps are always looking for people to help out. How you feel about boot camps may influence that one. Online training sites like Treehouse, Udacity, Codecademy, Code School, Pluralsight, and many, many more are always looking for teachers. For many of them, all you need is the camera on your laptop and the ability to record your screen. Microphone's nice to have. But you don't have to have a large, fancy setup to do them. Django Girls and PyLadies are always looking for people to lead workshops. And if you want to make money, a lot of money, doing it while traveling, corporate training is a great choice. You'll just be gone like 75% of the time. So those of you who made my slide things, so I'll say thank you to them. Yes?
What's wrong with boot camps?
What's wrong with boot camps? There's nothing wrong with boot camps. I think boot camps are great. There are occasionally somewhat predatory boot camps that don't teach as much as maybe they should and charge a large amount. But boot camps in general, I think, are a great idea. And I think it's been a very nice democratization of learning to program, because going to college is very, very expensive and doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to be a good programmer. But boot camps are very good at teaching the practical. So just research it, make sure it's a good solid boot camp, go for it. Yeah?
What are some coding challenge websites you recommend?
Some coding challenge websites that I recommend. There is codingbat.com, which is a super old school site that just has Java and Python challenges. That one's really great because you get to see all the test output and whether your tests are red or green, which I haven't found anyone else who does just that, and it's amazing for being able to solve the problems. There's a bunch of others that are like HackerRank and codefights.com, I want to say, is one. Those are a bit closer to like the competitive programming side, but they still have some really good challenges. I think the CodeFight ones actually has programming questions that have been asked in interviews, so you can go and practice for, say, an Amazon or a Google interview and actually do the code challenges online, which is great. Yes?
I think your example about inclusion is actually pretty cool because aside from this, I mean, just like talking about like regions around the world, how we're a pretty global company, we just don't, I can't think of how we often use like names from other countries.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who are like Chinese might be left out, which totally makes sense. And I think the reason is because sometimes names are hard to pronounce. But but YouTube is actually pretty useful. If you meet someone who's Chinese, you can YouTube their name. I think it's a good idea to like be able to do that and be able to use it in your presentation, not like an idiot. You're pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah, so the comment was about how it's often difficult to use names that aren't native to your language because you don't necessarily know how to pronounce them, but you can look that up online. And it's very true. One thing I've been noticing, especially like with more modern languages and frameworks, they're using examples on the front page that use Unicode characters. So it'll be like hello and then world in multiple languages in that language's characters. And that's nice to see, even though that's obviously not part of a human, it's just hello world, but it's still nice to see the support for the languages. And I think that helps a lot of people because am I going to have to anglicize my name to print it in this programming language? Can be a worry for some people. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.